Hey everyone, today I'm going to go through a romantic style chess game between Henry Edward Bird and Paul Morphy, played in the year 1858 in London. So this was a casual game in London between two very strong players of the time. In this game, Henry Edward Bird was playing with the white pieces and Paul Morphy was playing black. The game began with 1e4, Morphy played e5, Bird played knight to f3, and then there was d6. So we get into a Philidor position already, with the d6 pawn now protecting the e5 pawn. Bird continued with d4, undermining black's centre, and now Paul Morphy played a very popular line at the time, which was f5. However, in modern day chess now, this is considered very dubious. It's probably actually already losing for black already. If white continued with the move like bishop c4 here, black's just losing, because if f takes e4, white can play moves like knight takes e5. And for instance, if black captures this knight, then white can play queen h5 check. And if g6, there's queen takes e5 with check, picking up the rook on h8. So bishop c4 here is very strong. Another line also goes f takes e4, knight takes, and black can play a move like d5 here. But then this queen h5 move from white is just incredibly strong. And even after a move like g6, white has the nice knight takes g6. The point is the h-pawn is pinned, and there's also a discovered attack against black's king. And if black takes this knight off, then the queen will take the rook. So this line is incredibly dubious for black, but let's continue because the theory is obviously not as sophisticated as it is today. Knight c3 was played by Bird, and Morphy played f takes e4. White recaptured on e4, and now Morphy played d5, attacking the knights on e4. But again, in this position, black's still in a very dubious position. White could have got the advantage here with knight takes e5, sacrificing the knight on e4. So after d takes e4, again white could have played this move, queen h5 check. And for instance, after g6, we've seen this already, knight takes g6, will pick up a rook on h8. And if black tries to run away with the king here with king e7, this is just a terrible position for black to be in. There's queen f7, king d6, and then white can play knight c4 check. And after king c6, play knight to a5. If the black king moves to d6, bishop f4 will be checkmate. So after king b6, white can win the game with queen b3 check. King takes the knight, and then queen b5 is checkmate. So that would have been a very interesting position to play. However, going back after Morphy just played this d5 move, obviously Bird didn't see this. He played knight g3 instead, retreating his knight backwards, and Morphy played e4, attacking the knights on f3. Bird jumps his knight into e5. Again, this threat of queen h5 is now a big threat, so Morphy defends knight to f6, stops any queen h5 nonsense. Bird pins a knight on f6 with bishop g5, and Morphy develops quickly with bishop to d6. Bird now played knight h5, so the knight on f6 is pinned twice, and also this knight attacks the g7 pawn, threatening check. So Morphy did the obvious thing and just castled kingside, protects the g7 pawn, and supports the knight with the rook. If white takes this knight off with bishop takes, then black gets a good game here with just pawn takes. Knight will be forced to retreat backwards, and then black can just play f5. I mean, black's lost a pawn in front of the king here, but the king is quite safe on h8, and actually black's got really speedy development in this position. Back in the game though, instead of taking, Bird just played queen to d2, supporting his bishop on g5, and Morphy played queen to e8, attacking the knight on h5 and getting off this bishop's diagonal. Now the best move for white here is just to play knight takes f6, and after g takes f6, white should now just play maybe bishop takes f6, because after rook takes, they've got queen g5 check. After rook g6, knight takes rook, pawn takes, and queen takes d5 with check. Black is still actually considered better by a lot of grandmasters here because black's got the two bishops, but this is actually quite a nice position for white to be in considering what happened in the game. Because after queen e8 from Morphy, Bird now played g4 to protect his knight on h5. But now, as we'll see, Morphy just gains the initiative. He plays knight takes g4, taking off a pawn. The knight recaptures on g4, and then Morphy just picks up the knight on h5, and now he's attacking the knight on g4. which drops back in to e5. And Morphy just continues now to develop with knight to c6. Bird plays bishop to e2 to hit the queen, and Morphy just plonks it on h3. It really scuppers white's advancement here. Now the bishop and the knight are attacking this knight on e5, so bird takes on c6, Morphy recaptures, and to protect his f2 pawn he now plays bishop to e3, which protects the f2 pawn, allows white to castle queenside and maybe save the game. So Morphy now switches his attack. He plays rook to b8. It's got a very nice open b file, which hits out at b2. And bird castles straight into it. He protects his b pawn with the king. But now we get into a very interesting position. Now many top grandmasters actually say black should just play a move like bishop g4 here, because after takes rook g1 and queen h3. Black's got the initiative, controls all the white squares. His queen does a great job of shutting out the rook on h1 on this h-pawn, and maybe black can just play a move like rook to f3 here. And basically this pawn centre from black is just dominating the position. However, in the game Morphy played something completely different. He doesn't actually win, but it's very interesting. He sacrifices his rook. He plays rook takes f2, winning a pawn, sacrificing his rook. So why has he done this? Well, bird took the rook, and Morphy had to switch the attack. He played an amazing move, queen to a3, hitting this b2 pawn, threatening mate. And the point of this move is if white captures the queen, then bishop takes a3 is checkmate, because again this rook on the b file just dominates the king. So after queen to a3, it doesn't technically win because bird now played c3. The pawn is protected by the queen, but black's got a very strong attack. Morphy now plays queen takes a2, and this is actually a two-move checkmate that he's threatening. He's threatening to play queen to a1 with check, followed by queen takes b2, checkmate. So white is forced now to play b4. Stops black taking on b2 and now offers the trade of queens. Of course, black isn't going to accept this. So Morphy just plays queen a1 check, king c2 is forced. Morphy throws in queen to a4. And now we get into a crossroads. White's got a few moves here. In the game he played king to b2, which loses, but king c1 was interesting. And there's a lot of analysis on this position, but having gone through it with Stockfish, a5 is considered the best move. And after queen c2, black should play queen to a3 in this position. After queen b2, play a takes b4. I guess the point is if white trades queens, then this pawn takes and it's going to run down the board because the b rook is incredibly strong here. And c4 was suggested by Stockfish, and then queen c3 was suggested. Takes, and bishop to g3, and bishop to a3 check, king to c2, and then rook to b2, king takes, and rook takes e2. Black's actually the exchange down in this position, but the computer gives this as black as slightly better. I guess it's because black's got so many more pawns in the position, and the two bishops aren't exactly terrible pieces in this position. However, that was a very complicated variation, and there's so many sub-variations to go through. But unfortunately for bird, he made it easy for Morphy here. He just played king to b2, which instantly loses to Morphy's move. Bishop takes b4, sacrificing a piece. The pawn takes on b4, and now rook takes b4. If the king moves away, they'll be checkmate very shortly, so basically now white is forced to give up the queen. Queen takes b4. Queen takes b4 is played, and king to c2. So on paper, maybe this doesn't look so bad for white. His king's a bit exposed, but the material isn't so bad. However, now Morphy gets his last piece into the game, and this is a very nice move. e3. Attacks the bishop, so forces white to take, but now follows up with this move. Bishop to f5 check, getting his last piece into the position, and all of a sudden white's king looks very exposed here. If white blocks this with the bishop, bishop to d3, black can just win with queen c4 check. The bishop on d3 is pinned, so after a move like king to b2, black will just pick up the bishop, bishop takes d3 and wins an extra piece. In the game though, bird had to block with the rook, rook to d3 was played. Again, queen c4 was played with check, forcing white to protect the rook with king to d2. And now Morphy just finishes the game with a nice move, queen to a2. The point of this move is, let's say king e1, then black can just take on d3. If the bishop takes, is queen a1, winning the rook. And if we go back in the game, king to d1 was played by Bird, and Morphy finished with queen to b1 with check. If the king moves, then the queen can take on h1. And if bishop to c1 here, then just bishop takes d3 is enough for black to win the game. So this was the final position, and Henry Bird resigned, and Morphy played an outstanding game here. Obviously in the opening the theory isn't up to scratch by modern day standards, but you can tell by the middle game and the end game that these players were supremely strong, especially Morphy. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the analysis of this game. If you did, please do drop a like, comment or subscribe to the channel to support me, and hopefully I'll see you soon for another chess video.